Picture a man waking up before sunrise. He rolls off a pile of animal skins, steps over two people who are still asleep, walks to the edge of the camp. The first thing he does is drink. Not water. Something slightly thicker, slightly sour, slightly warm from sitting overnight. A fermented grain drink that his group has been producing continuously for as long as anyone in the group can remember. Drinks it the way you drink coffee, automatically, without thinking much about it. Because this is just what morning is. You've been told a story about ancient humans and alcohol. That goes roughly like this. Alcohol was discovered accidentally, probably from fruit that had fermented on the ground. It was consumed occasionally, in ritual contexts, by special members of the group for spiritual purposes. It was rare and significant and treated with reverence. Almost none of that story is accurate. The real story is considerably stranger, considerably more relevant to the drink that is probably within arm's reach of you right now. Let us start with what we know for certain. The oldest confirmed alcoholic beverage found in the archaeological record dates to roughly 9,000 years ago. Discovered at a site called Jiahu in China. It was a fermented mixture of rice, honey, and fruit, found in ceramic vessels that showed chemical residue consistent with alcohol production. 9,000 years ago. That is 4,000 years before the wheel. That is before writing. That is before any of the structures typically associate with civilization. Humans were making fermented drinks before they made almost anything else. It required that level of planning and sustained effort. But that is the oldest confirmed evidence. The actual start of human alcohol consumption almost certainly goes back much further, because alcohol in its most basic form does not require human production at all. Overripe fruit ferments naturally. Honey left in a container with water ferments naturally. Any grain that gets wet and sits in warmth will begin to ferment. The environment ancient humans lived in is producing low-level alcohol constantly, passively, without anyone having to do anything. Critically, the genetic evidence suggests that our ancestors were built to handle it. Researchers identified a mutation in the gene that produces the enzyme ADH4, which metabolizes ethanol. That occurred in the common ancestor, humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, approximately 10 million years ago. This mutation made the enzyme 40 times more efficient at breaking down ethanol than it was before. 10 million years ago, biological machinery for processing alcohol was upgraded in our lineage 65 times longer ago than the oldest evidence of deliberate brewing. We're not just adapted to tolerate alcohol, we were specifically upgraded for it, and the upgrade predates our species. An almost incomprehensible margin. The implication that some researchers draw from this is uncomfortable but hard to argue with. Consumption of fermented substances was not an occasional accident in our evolutionary history. It was routine enough and consistent enough across millions of years that natural selection bothered to optimize our enzymes for it. Evolution does not invest in upgrades for things that happen rarely. So what were early humans actually drinking and how often? The evidence from early brewing sites suggests that fermented grain drinks were being produced in substantial quantities at least 9,000 years ago and probably earlier. The site of Göbekli Tepe in what is now Turkey, which dates to roughly 11,000 years ago and represents one of the oldest known large-scale human construction projects, contains stone vessels that researchers believe used for fermentation, with a capacity to produce hundreds of liters of fermented drink at a time. Hundreds of liters at a site that predates agriculture as we understand it. Some researchers now argue that the desire to produce fermented grain drinks reliably may have been one of the primary drivers that pushed humans toward cultivating grain in the first place, not bread. Here, the need for a consistent and scalable supply of fermentation ingredients may have helped kickstart the agricultural revolution. Think about what that means for a moment. One of the most significant transitions in human history, shift from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agricultural civilization, may have been substantially driven the desire to have a reliable supply of alcohol. Now let us talk about what people were actually drinking day to day, because here is the thing that gets left out. Most historical accounts of alcohol for the majority of human history in most parts of the world, alternative to drinking fermented beverages, was drinking water. And for most of human history, most populated areas, water was genuinely dangerous. Water sources near human settlements were contaminated with animal waste, human waste, the runoff from decomposing organic material. Drinking untreated water from a river or well near a populated area was a reliable way to contract dysentery, cholera, typhoid, and a range of other waterborne illnesses. Killed people efficiently and regularly. Fermented drinks, even at low alcohol content, have properties that make them significantly safer. Untreated water. The fermentation process acidifies the liquid, killing many common bacteria. The alcohol content, even at the relatively low levels of ancient beers and wines, typically between 2 and 4%, inhibits bacterial growth. Drinking a low-alcohol fermented grain beverage was not just culturally normal in the ancient world. In many contexts, it was the rational health choice compared to the available alternatives. This is why in ancient Mesopotamia, the daily ration of beer was a standard unit of economic exchange. Workers on construction projects in ancient Sumer received payment partly in beer. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest legal documents in human history, includes includes regulations about beer pricing and distribution. In ancient Egypt, workers who built the pyramids received a daily ration of beer as part of their compensation, not occasionally, daily, as a fundamental part of their caloric and social intake. Egyptian records indicate that ordinary workers consumed somewhere between 1 and 2 liters of beer per day. Skilled workers and officials consumed more. Beer was not a luxury in ancient Egypt. It was a staple food. It was consumed at breakfast. It was given to children. It was administered to patients as medicine. It was offered to the gods. It was everywhere in daily life, in a way that has no modern equivalent, because we have solved the water contamination problem, the infrastructure that ancient humans did not have access to. The drinks themselves were very different from what you would recognize as beer today. Ancient grain ferments were typically low in alcohol, thick in consistency, often still actively fermenting when consumed, full of nutritional content from the grain itself, including B vitamins, calories, and carbohydrates. Researchers who have reconstructed ancient Egyptian beer recipes describe the result as closer to a thin porridge, with mild alcoholic content, than anything resembling a modern beverage. Drank it through a straw to filter out the grain solids. It was a food as much as a drink. Here is the complication. Low alcohol content does not mean zero intoxicating effect, especially when you are consuming 1 to 2 liters per day, especially if you are also smaller than the average modern human, being less consistently, and working physically demanding labor in high heat. Researchers have estimated the mild but continuous intoxication produced by daily ancient beer consumption would have been noticeable, not dramatic, not incapacitating, but noticeable, a persistent mild fuzz at the edges of daily experience. That was simply the normal state of being human. Most of recorded history, we have no frame of reference for this. Modern humans who drink alcohol do so in bouts. Drink in the evening. We drink at social occasions. Drink and then we stop and we sober up. And we go to work. And the next day we are clear. Ancient daily beer consumption did not work this way. It was continuous and ongoing throughout the day, every day, producing a state that researchers sometimes describe as chronic mild inebriation. Not drunk, not sober in the way we understand sobriety. Something in between. That was simply normal. And this was not limited to the ancient Near East. Across ancient Greece, wine was consumed daily and was standard at every meal, always diluted significantly with water. The mixing ratio was a cultural signifier of sophistication versus barbarism. In ancient China, fermented millet drinks were daily staples. In ancient Mesoamerica, pulque made from fermented agave was consumed regularly by most of the population. In sub-Saharan Africa, fermented sorghum drinks have been continuous daily staples for longer than written records exist. The pattern is consistent across every ancient civilization that has left us enough records to study. Daily alcohol consumption was the default. Sobriety as a baseline state was not the norm. It was the exception, associated either with very young children, illness, poverty so extreme that you could not afford access fermented drinks, or specific ritual contexts of fasting and purification, which means that when you look at ancient human history, the construction of monuments, the writing of law codes, the creation of art, the development of philosophy, building of the first cities, a significant portion of it was accomplished by people who were, by our standards, mildly drunk all the time. And perhaps the most surprising part of all of this is not that ancient humans drank every day. It is that for most of human history, it was the sober people who were the odd ones out.